Okay, thank you all for coming. Good evening. My name is John Torpey. I'm director of the Ralph Bunche Institute for International Studies and the European Union Studies Center, which is part of the Ralph Bunche Institute. And we're thrilled to present this year's Otto and Fran Walter Memorial Lecture. Otto Walter was a longtime friend and donor to the European Union Studies Center, whose generous bequest makes possible this important annual event. Though his life's plans were destroyed by Nazi hatred, his life's work was to build peace. He would be devastated that war has again broken out in Europe, and yet he would be thrilled that the country of his birth and the country of his adoption are this time working together to confront hatred. We're also grateful to the DAAD Alumni Association of the United States for their co-sponsorship of this event. Let me now introduce our guest of honor, whom we're very happy to have. David Gill has been Consul General in New York since 2017, and before that he served as State Secretary and Chief of Staff to German President Joachim Gauck. However, Consul General Gill has had a far from conventional political career, although a not untypical East German biography, one might say. He grew up in Herrnhut, Saxony, in the former East Germany, and was denied a higher education by the communist regime for political reasons. Instead, he trained and worked as a plumber, comes in handy, I'm sure, before pursuing theological studies in the Protestant church in Berlin-Brandenburg. In 1990, he initially was the chairman of the Normannenstrasse Citizens Committee, which oversaw the dissolution of the Ministry of State Security of the Staatssicherheit at the Stasi headquarters, and he served as the secretary of the Special Committee of the East German Parliament for the dissolution of the Stasi. After reunification, he became spokesman and head of the research division of the Federal Commissioner for the Stasi Files and studied law in Berlin and Philadelphia. Now that's unusual. He has held positions in the Federal Ministry of the Interior, at the Commissioner for Data Protection and Freedom of Information, and he's also served as the Deputy Representative of the Council of the Protestant Church in Germany to the Federal Republic of Germany and the European Union. So, Herr Gill, thanks very much for coming. It was really great to have you, and for reasons that will become clear later in the evening, it's probably the last time we're going to have him here, so we're happy he's here, but sad that he's going. So let's begin with the Ukraine war, which has, of course, unsettled Europe and the world, with the largest land war in Europe in the post-1945 period. The war has led German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, as I'm sure most of you know, to announce a so-called Zeitenwende, that is a major transformation in Germany's military posture compared to its previous post-World War II stance. And I wonder if you could just explain for us what this somewhat strange word Zeitenwende really means.
I can try, certainly. But before, I just want to say how happy I am to be back at the Graduate Center of CUNY. It was probably in my second or third month that I served as Consul General here that you invited me to come here, and we had a great morning and lunch with the then director or president, I don't know what the title is, and I was very impressed by what's going on in this Graduate Center with all the different studies and these scientists who work here and the scholars who work together. And so I'm really happy to be back and to talk about what's going on in Europe, in Germany, in the world. Well, Zeitenwende is a very German word, obviously, and if you want to translate it, then you would probably use the term turning point, which was used by Olaf Scholz when he described something what really changed not only Europe, but the whole world, and not only the Ukraine, but Europe and the whole world, and also Germany. So it was basically an end of an era, I don't have to explain to you what happened then. It was for the first time in Europe since the Second World War that a full-fledged war broke out. An independent, democratic country was invaded by its neighbor, and the shock was great everywhere. You remember probably the day when it happened, and also what happened in Berlin afterwards was pretty dramatic. Even the setting was dramatic. The beginning of the war was a Thursday, February the 24th, and for the first time in more than 70 years of the existence of the Federal Republic of Germany, the parliament came together on a Sunday for a working session, because the Chancellor wanted to give a declaration about what's now to do, what's on stake now for Germany in this situation. And he gave a speech which described a dramatic change in many ways. First of all, he pledged a special fund of 100 billion euros to modernize the German military. And that was a big, big shift. In Germany after the war, the military existed, but nobody really, no, not nobody, that's wrong, but it was not an instrument what German people saw as an instrument for politics. It was the first time that in the late 90s, the Bundeswehr, the German military, served in peacekeeping missions on the Balkan. This was a big, big step. But that we would put 100 billion euros in a modernization program for our military, that was something unthinkable even 2 weeks before. And the reason for this was that everybody suddenly understood there is a danger for our way of life, for our country, for democracy, for freedom, for Europe. And so he was applauded for that in a very big way, even though it was hard, particularly for the left parties, to follow this way. But we learned a lot over the last year, over the last 14 months now. That's long the war is going on. So this was this program. A second major step and change was also in how we export weapons now. It was for good reason that Germany was very reluctant to export weapons in regions of crisis and war. Actually, in our, it was legally not allowed to do so. And 1.5 years ago, there wouldn't have been a possibility to send weapons to Ukraine in the situation where it is now. So we changed our approach in this way also, and in a dramatic way. And since the beginning of the war, also the kind of weapons which were delivered changed over the time. We started with small deliveries, with cars, with armored cars, and now we deliver even battle tanks, what we wouldn't have done in the beginning. It's also a development and understanding how necessary the support for Ukraine and the military means is. But there's more of a turning point also. We realized in Germany that a dependency as we had until the beginning of the war from Russia in energy questions can't work anymore. And we learned it the hard way, I have to say. Before the war, more than 50% of the oil used in Germany was imported from Russia. 55% of the natural gas was imported from Russia. And it is amazing how the government, together with the economy and the businesses in Germany, managed to change this dependency. So today, Germany doesn't import any oil, any gas from Russia, and the economy is still running. So that's a major, major, major shift and achievement what was possible. And that's not only a change in politics and a change in the political discussion, that's also a change all over. The approach to military, the approach to support Ukrainians, the openness to receive refugees, 1 million Ukrainian refugees in Germany. That's not just discussed in political circles. That's really embraced by the great majority of the Germans.
Well, that was the next question I wanted to ask you. I mean, Chancellor Scholz was rather hesitant about sending those tanks until the United States agreed that they were going to do that first. And then he had, I think, the cover he thought he needed in order to make that announcement. And then, you know, recently in the Ostermärsche, the Easter peace marches, you know, one saw a continued kind of lack of enthusiasm for this kind of departure from the previous German posture. And I wonder, I mean, you say that, you know, the decision or this Zeitenwende has been embraced, but I wonder, you know, is that entirely the case?
Well, I said there was a good reason that Germany was reluctant for a long, long time to deliver weapons and military machinery in regions of crisis. And that's why it took time to reach the level of support, military support, we are able and willing to deliver to Ukraine. And of course, that's not different here in the United States. Politicians always have also to think about what does it mean for our country when we support Ukraine. Do we become part of a party of this war? How do we endanger our own position towards Russia, not economically but militarily? Do we still have enough military means to defend ourselves? So we can't just give all the tanks and everything to the Ukrainians, and in the end, Germany is not able to defend itself. So that's a question you have to consider when you decide what can we, how can we help the Ukrainians militarily. So, but what the support of this politics, so there's a broad support of this politics. I looked it up, the numbers, regarding the military aid Germany gives to Ukraine. 47%, almost half of the Germans say this kind of support is appropriate. But even 16%, almost a fifth of the Germans say it's not enough, we should do more. And way less than a third of the Germans said we should be more reluctant, we should do more in this field of military support. So there is still great support in the German public, also in this difficult question, how can we support Ukraine militarily?
So it sounds as though Scholz got the support that he
and of course
defined.
But maybe he convinced people, and they see what's going on. And you always have to consider when you think about how people think about the war. Between Germany and Ukraine, there's only Poland. Kiev is as far from Berlin as Chicago is from New York. So it doesn't mean something for your life. And it is a threat, or it is at least close to your own home. And in addition, 1 million refugees from Ukraine remind the Germans that there is a terrible, cruel war there, and they can't live at home. Mostly women with their children. The fathers are fighting, or the brothers, and so this does something to the people and how they see that it is not some far war we have nothing to do with. It's much closer, and we can make a difference when we support our Ukrainian friends.
Well, this sort of leads into the next question I wanted to ask you, which has to do with developments in Germany since basically 1989. I first got to Germany in 1981, shortly before General Jaruzelski in Poland, announced martial law. And I looked at the map and I thought about, that's as far from where I grew up as New York City, roughly. I mean, it was very close. Suddenly this naive American kid was in the middle of Central Europe, and it was much more real. But in any case, I mean, we talked about your East German roots, and, I ended up writing a dissertation about these developments. But the question basically is, there had been those who said in 1989 that, it would take a generation, basically, for East and West Germany to grow together. And, das, was zusammengehört, wächst zusammen, and those sorts of things. And it's been a difficult process. I mean, I wonder what you would say about where that process stands now.
Well, I want to start, you talked about martial law of Jaruzelski. I still remember very well when it was introduced. I think it was 2nd of Advent in 1981. I was 15 years old, and I remember when I heard it in the radio, and it was the same weekend when Helmut Schmidt, the Chancellor of West Germany, visited East Germany. So there was a lot of things going on. And I grew up in a little town in Saxony, maybe 10 kilometers away from the Polish border. And until 1981, there were 2 countries we could just travel without any restrictions. And this was Poland and Czechoslovakia. Not Russia, not Yugoslavia, nothing like this. Poland and Czechoslovakia. And after martial law was introduced, this border was also closed. So, well, there is much achieved in East Germany and in the United Germany. Incredible things were made possible. If you look at the cities and towns in East Germany, the infrastructure, the wages, the material security of the people, social security, etc., and the possibilities and opportunities for the people, much is achieved. And much with a great support from the West. The richer part, 4/5 of the country, could, I wouldn't say easily support the smaller, the 1/5 of the country, but that was a great benefit for East Germany and the other Eastern European countries, which you could compare before the fall of the wall, had in this way a much harder way than East Germany. On the other hand, it was a dramatic change. It was a Zeitenwende, if you want, more for the people in East Germany than in West Germany. The West Germans, they could live their life basically as they did before, and there were even more opportunities. Suddenly there were I don't know how many universities in East Germany we had, but maybe 15, maybe 20, maybe 25. And for West German scholars and teachers, it was also an opportunity to go there, because in East Germany, people lacked education because either they were excluded from higher education, or in certain fields like history, law, political science, those were not the people we wanted to have in our universities anymore. There was a need also for new scholars, new teachers, new professors. And the East Germans also lacked resources. I mean, there was, we didn't starve. We had a decent life, but there were resources, for instance, to buy property, to renovate buildings, etc. They were not there. And so many from the West came and helped, but also owned and now own the beautiful houses which we had renovated in the last 30 years. So what I want to say, there is still a difference in some ways. And there is a difference in some fields and in some parts of the society, which is even perpetuated over the years, because the chances at the starting point of reunification were so different. And in East Germany also, the first years were pretty hard for the average people who lost their jobs. So the whole economy broke down. It was very clear the East German economy was not compatible in any way to the West. The West was easily able to serve the East. So no East German wanted to buy East German cars anymore. No East German wanted to have the products they never liked. They wanted to have what they could buy from the West. So that all contributed to a devastating collapse of the economy, which made millions unemployed. And younger people, my generation, was able to go to West Germany to work. So when I had my class reunions, 80% for a while came from Bavaria or Baden-Württemberg or Hamburg, because there were the jobs. And those who were not mobile, the older one, even when you were 40 and had a family, you were left behind and realized that your chance, at least for a period of 5 to 10 years, are much smaller. So we say it's a process. The younger generation is no longer so affected by this, but there are still differences.
Right. I mean, the pre-1989 past is now so far back for younger people that it's just, ancient history, so to speak. So I guess the question is, have the two populations, insofar as they're two, grown to have the same sort of consciousness of the country that they live in? I mean, I was struck by the fact that in the East, the opposition to German involvement in the war and to the war in some ways itself is stronger. So there are still regional differences in people's outlooks about the world. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
There is a stronger opposition against this military support of Ukraine, or maybe even a stronger support of Russia. It's not so much about, they don't think so much about Ukraine, but they are more, it resonates more what Putin always said, I had to do this for my self-defense, because if I wouldn't march into Ukraine, then the NATO would march into Russia, which is nonsense, but it resonates at least in a certain percentage of the population. But by far not the majority, and it's maybe some percentage more than in the West, but I wouldn't say that's an East German phenomenon and only there. You have also conspiracy theorists in the West, and interestingly, all the leaders of the right-wing AfD in East Germany, well, almost all of them come from the West, but they find more followers in the East for several reasons. It might be also the anti-Americanism, which exists also in the West, but for other reasons. But if you had learned for decades in your youth and young adulthood that America is the enemy and the imperialistic country which wants to have influence all over the world, then it might be still in your head. And but it's not that the East is against the support of Ukraine or thinks that Russia does the right thing.
I didn't mean to suggest that. I hope that was clear. But we were talking beforehand about how long you've been here, and you corrected me that it's 6 years, not 7. But nonetheless, you've been here through 6 rather eventful years. And I'm now going to ask you to be forthcoming about your experience of American life during the previous administration. And, you know, there were a lot of questions raised about the relationship between our administration and, for example, NATO, and with our European partners more generally. And lots of questions raised about, you know, the reliability of the United States as a partner. You're part of the diplomatic structure of Germany. You know, what would you say about that? How is that perceived? Has the, you know, the upset kind of been overcome in the meantime, and the wound healed insofar as there's a wound? I mean, how would you describe that?
Well, when I came here in 2017, I experienced a country in two minds. Enthusiasm on the one hand, shock at the other hand. On the other hand, and this was interesting to see, not so much in New York. New York is different than other parts of the country. But yes, it was interesting, and it was not easy also for us as diplomats to deal with a new situation we hadn't experienced before. That suddenly the close relationship and the transatlantic relationship was questioned, or at least not considered particularly necessary anymore. My colleagues in Washington experienced this much more than we did here in New York, of course, because they deal with the national bilateral level, and it was something they never had experienced before, that they didn't have partners in the departments and State Department. Either there were new appointees who were not interested in the transatlantic relationship, or there were no appointees in many posts, and they didn't know with whom to talk to. And of course, the signals the president of this country sent during his first years to the allies were not helpful either. You remember the G7 summit in Canada, where President Trump left early to meet the North Korean leader. The message was that is more important in the moment than to come together with my natural allies, if you want. Yeah. And how to deal with this? This was really difficult. And if you ask reliable partners, yes, I'm convinced the Americans are reliable partners, but we also have to learn that this America is a very colorful country, and we can't pick our partners in this country, and we have to really try to build a network in all parts of the society and also in all parts of the political landscape. And that's a teaching of this time. We have to invest, and we can't take the transatlantic and the German-American relationship for granted. We have to work for that. And we sometimes explain to ourselves, but also to our American partners, why this relationship is so important. And in this way, the war in Ukraine even helps. I think many, many people realized, yes, we are natural partners, and yes, we share a foundation of our society. Might we think in certain fields of politics very differently, but we have a foundation of democracy, the rule of law, freedom, which we can't take for granted, not here, not there, and that's why we have to stand together. And this is, I really would say, a positive outcome of the last 14 months, not only in politics, but also in a society, at least when I talk about Germany, that people realize, yes, that is something what is worth to fight for, and we have to defend that.
Well, that's interesting what you say about, connecting with all parts of the country. And it occurs to me that, it's a question that I have for, what you do in your job. I mean, you're based in New York, but there's a big wide country out there, most of it far west of New York. And I wonder, have you had a chance to travel around the country and get a sense of what life is like elsewhere, or not really?
I mean, you don't have to travel so far to see how different this country is. When you go 70 miles west to Delaware Water Gap and this region, and look how people live there and what their problems are, or Pennsylvania, rural Pennsylvania. So my district here is New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, which is a small part of the U.S., but compared to Germany, is 2/3 of Germany and half of the population of Germany. So, and yes, this country is, and that's why I like this country also so much. It's such a colorful and diverse country, not only if you look at the people, but also the landscape, the mentality, etc. And of course, I didn't stay in my district alone. No. With my family, we traveled to the west. We just came back 2 weeks ago from the Carolinas and Tennessee, and it's wonderful to see this diversity, and also to see the problems, and that you can have different approaches of certain fields of politics, of living standards, of convictions when you live in Arizona or in New York. Even when you talk about gun law, when you travel in these wide fields, you can understand that there a gun plays a different role than here in New York. What is the teaching out of it, and what should be the politics? That's another question. But you can understand that people in Arizona or in the Death Valley think differently about life and what's necessary in life than people in New York City. And it's great.
Yes. Well, I think you're lucky, of course, to have had that opportunity. But I'm sort of curious, as you are reaching the end of your tenure here in New York, what will you remember most? What will you happily leave in the rearview mirror? What stays with you, and what would you just as soon not necessarily have to do anymore?
So one thing really is this great diversity of this country and its people that I will miss. My wife Sheila is American, and when we met 30 years ago, she used to live in New York. She's sitting there, if you ask who's my wife. And when she came to Berlin, I remember that, when she came to Berlin in '95. Berlin changed over the years also, but she was shocked how white and just uniform Berlin and Germany is compared with New York City. So that's wonderful. I also like the openness in this country, and yes, that's something I really will miss. I have to say, what I won't miss, or that's the wrong phrase, and I hope it will change, but for instance, this mass shooting of the last weeks, and that's something what I can't understand. It's also a question of the guns in this country, and I don't know how and if the country is able to find a way out of this, and I hope so. That is something what really, really concerns me, particularly now in the last days when you every day another case. And what does it make with a country? I'm also worried.
Well, it reminds me of when I was doing the research for this dissertation I told you about. I was interviewing a woman named Ulrika Papa, whose name you will recognize, and she was one of the most courageous opponents, I would say, of the East German regime. A relatively petite woman, but sort of fire plug, kind of a tough character. In a good way, but she told me she had been invited to a conference in Detroit and she was afraid to go because all she ever heard about the United States was, mass shootings. In any case, I wanted to open the floor for Q&A. If you have a question, we have Jimmy will come and bring you the mic, and I guess there's a question, and then come to you next, okay?
Thank you so much for the fascinating conversation. I wanted to ask you how would you characterize the new world order that has shaped after the war in Ukraine, and at the same time the implications of the war for the European Union, if more deepening integration, European integration is needed in terms of security, defense. If you want to talk a little bit also about that. Thank you so much.
I didn't understand it. About European integration? Ukraine and the European integration?
Yeah, what are the implications of the war in Ukraine for the European Union? If we need deepening European integration, thinking about security, defense. I think that Professor Torpey has already mentioned that, but if you wanted to talk a little bit more about the implications for the European Union and if what changes have been made. I know that also like Ursula von der Leyen was visiting the White House a month ago also to strengthen the cooperation with the United States. If you want to talk a little bit about that, thank you so much.
And of course, President Zelensky was in Brussels as well. And I mean, I remember when I served the German president, we went with the Polish and the Italian and the German president to the Polish-Ukrainian border. It must have been in 2013 to meet with Yanukovych and convince him that he should go the European way. He decided differently, and then everything went in a different way. But this is a long discussion for Ukraine, and the situation in the moment gave the whole discussion a big push, and the European Union committed itself to open the membership to Ukraine. They formally committed, but of course it doesn't mean Ukraine doesn't have to fulfill certain conditions economically. The rule of law, democratic, transparency, corruption, all these questions are not off the table, but they will be supported heavily when the war is over. And beside the support and economic reconstruction, I mean, donor meetings are already happening today, and they are already collecting money to rebuild Ukraine once the war is over. Germany pledged a certain sum, and when Ukraine is able to work on this or to walk on this path, they will end up to be full members of the European Union. I'm totally convinced, and I have no doubts.
Thank you. The United States is currently concerned about China's position towards Russia and the Ukrainian war, whether they might ship arms. What is Germany's position on this?
Germany is also concerned. Our foreign minister was for her first visit to China just last week, and she was talking about certain issues also, and we would wish that China would be able to be a part of finding a path to peace, but in the moment we cannot see it. They had some plans, but they are not plans including both sides in this way. We realized that China, and when Annalena Baerbock was in Beijing, it was very clear, or her colleague said, they will not send weapons to Russia. That is good news. But we don't know what the further development will be. And of course, Annalena Baerbock was in Beijing, and the defense minister of China traveled to Moscow. This is also a message. And of course, there's beside the policy towards Russia and the relationship with Russia, there are other things of concern for us as well. I mean, the threat against Taiwan is unacceptable, and everybody can only hope that Beijing will refrain from really invade there. And on the other hand, we need China as an ally in questions of climate change. We have to work and want to work together. And China is an important economic partner for Germany. Not only that we import a lot of Chinese goods. I think we import less than the United States from China, but China is also an important market for German goods, and particularly machinery, etc., etc. And the German automotive industry is very active in China. So these are all issues which are now discussed. Our ministry works on a China strategy at the moment, where all these questions are looked at, and this is also a lesson from what happened with Russia. We really have to find a way out of reliance on only one partner, and that's with China very similar in other fields than energy. Should we, I don't know how much time we have, should we collect some questions or no? Good, yes.
Ich habe ein Mikrofon jetzt. A number of years ago, the Germans took in, when Angela Merkel was chancellor, between 1 million and 2 million refugees, mainly from Syria and other countries. And she took a lot of flack for that. It pretty much ruined her career. How would you compare the reception to the 1 million Ukrainians by the average Germans and by the German society to the reception that the Syrian refugees got?
Let me quickly recall 2015. It was not only this side of the discussion. When the first refugees came and Angela Merkel opened the border, the vast majority of the Germans embraced these refugees, welcomed them. It was a wave of solidarity we have never seen in Germany before, really. That was, we were really amazed how millions of Germans were willing to help. And that made something with our country as well, and that was a wonderful feeling. And yes, then people realized it is not as easy as we might have thought, and we have to find ways to integrate these people. And then there was more and more opposition, and but still a majority felt it's the right thing to help people who are fleeing war, suppression, etc. And I would say overall the integration went quite okay. They went quite okay. I would say the majority of these people stayed in Germany. They didn't go back, and here one of the difference to the refugee situation in a moment starts. About 1 million Ukrainians fled to Germany alone. Their status is very different from the refugees 2015. They have a status close to the green card. They can work from the first moment on. They get social security. They have health insurance. The kids go to school. About 300,000 Ukrainian kids in German schools. That does also something with their friends in the school, even though some of them go to two schools. They go to the German school during the day, and in the evening they go per Zoom to their Ukrainian school, because that's the big difference. These refugees wait for the day when they can go back. So they really are in Germany to survive and go back to their fathers, to their grandparents, and and they are cultural, of course, much closer to our experience, and that makes it also easier. Ethnically, culturally, and I think almost 90% of the Germans say it's right that we open our country for these refugees.
About the invasion of Ukraine by Putin, who clearly is a dictator. He kills journalists, he imprisons his opposition. But he came into Ukraine claiming that Ukraine was fascist. And that was perhaps disingenuous in part, but it has a foundation. The foundation is that in '92, when the Soviet Union collapsed, several political parties in Kiev declared themselves fascist, with millions of followers. And to this day, the Azov battalion strikes the Hitler salute. And to this day, there's a background of pro-fascist sentiment going back to World War II, when 500,000 Ukrainians volunteered for the SS, the Himmler's Waffen-SS, and hundreds of thousands worked in the factories of the Reich, helping the labor supply, and others worked in concentration camps, and many worked as construction troops building the fortifications which United States troops faced on Utah Beach. Now, what I mean all this to say that this gives Germany and the United States a golden opportunity. Germany can say, we want to help you Ukrainians, you are being attacked. You deserve our help, but we also deserve that you have an anti-fascist law like Germany's, which has worked well for 50 years, which prohibits Nazi and fascist manifestations, and no one decently can resent that, can oppose that, and if you do such a thing, then we will happily support you. But if you don't, if the pro-fascist elements in the country are too strong, then we won't help you. I think
Okay,
this is an opportunity.
can we let him answer?
Excuse me, yes.
we let
This is
him
an
answer?
opportunity. Just a minute. I think this is an opportunity
We don't
that
need a
Germany
speech,
has.
we just need a question.
I think the question is clear. This is an
Question is clear,
opportunity
but can
Germany
he answer
has to put its foot down and make that a condition of its aid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, 40 million Ukrainians are in a war, and we don't have the time, I have to say, or to take hostage the 38 millions who don't have anything to do with fascist ideology in this situation. That this might be a question when they rebuild Ukraine, that they have to deal with this part of the political spectrum. That might be right, but let's be careful. You have right-wing political parties all over Europe and all over the world, unfortunately. And there is no evidence that the government or President Zelensky has any connections to these groups, and that's why I wouldn't. We can't have this discussion now and say we don't help you before you have managed to get rid of this problem. That's not an option. In the moment, we have to help the Ukrainian people, and they are not fascists. That's a propaganda of the Kremlin, and we can't follow this. And yes, there was support during the Third Reich, but even that has to be addressed, but not in these circumstances in the moment. And it's really, I'm very, very, that's what Putin really wants people to believe, that he fights fascism in Ukraine. And he doesn't care about these Azov troops. He cares about Ukraine. He cares about Ukraine, and he wants to take over Ukraine, and he wants to make it Russian. That's his goal. He doesn't care about fascists or not.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, so really quickly, with U.S. long-term strategic thinking more focused now on Taiwan, or growing to be more focused now on Taiwan, do you see European security moving forward with deeper ties to NATO, or more of strategic autonomy?
What I didn't.
Can you speak more towards European thinking towards strategic autonomy? Macron said, I think a couple of years ago, that NATO was essentially brain dead.
Yeah. No, okay, sorry. No, even President Macron wouldn't say it anymore. That is very clear. That's also, I mean, look, Finland is now a member of NATO. I would have sworn 1,000 Eide, that never will happen. And Putin showed to the Finns, we have to be in a group of like-minded countries who will defend us, and we will defend our democracies and freedom and our countries against aggressors. And I'm sure for the next decades, this lesson is learned. And in general, I would say, yes, in Europe there are discussions that we have to take sometimes our own things more in our own hands, militarily, etc. But that doesn't mean that there's an equidistance against the Chinese and the Americans. No way. We know that our allies are on this side of the Atlantic. But yes, we should not only rely on the big brother from America, also in military means. We have to find our own way as well, but in alliance with our partners here in America and also in Asia. There are democratic countries as well, which are close allies like Japan or South Korea and others.
Okay, thank you all for coming. I just want to say thanks so much to Consul General David Gill for taking time out of his busy schedule, and I know it's a busy schedule, for joining us this evening, and the audience here at the Graduate Center and via Zoom for taking part in the 2023 Otto and Fran Walter Memorial Lecture. A video of this event will be posted to the Graduate Center's YouTube channel, and the audio will be uploaded as an episode of the Ralph Bunche Institute's podcast, which is called International Horizons, and can be found wherever fine podcasts can be found. Spotify, I've forgotten exactly, but in any case, I'm sure you'll find it. So thank you all for coming, and please thank David Gill.